Hi, everybody. Welcome. So glad to see so many people here tonight who really care about building connections and having conversations in these really trying times. So thrilled to have so many people coming in. We're already over 400, and I know that's going to keep growing. So if you are brand new and have never been to a Red Wine and Blue event before, welcome. We're really glad you're here. My name is Julie Womack. I'm the head of organizing. Red Wine and Blue is a national organization. We have over 600,000 members across the country, all 50 states, and we engage and empower women to fight extremism in their communities. I'm going to tell you a couple of things really quick, and then we're going to get to the main event. So if you have been with us for a while, or if you listen tonight and you're like, wow, I really like everything I'm hearing, I really want to, stay involved with what Red Wine and Blue is doing, then I am going to give you a little clue, and I have the wrong app up first, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyways. Okay, we have an app. We had just launched this about a month ago, so this is a really great way to stay in touch with us about events like what you're seeing tonight, messaging guidance. There's community chats. If you want to get off Facebook but still talk to people, come in here and chat in our community. We have so many great things you can do, so just go to the App Store, Red Wine ampersand Blue, and you can find us there, download it, scan those QR codes. One of the things you can find in there and sign up for is next week, next Thursday, Stacey Abrams is coming to see us, which we're really excited about. So Dale is going to drop the link in the chat for that as well, but you can sign up in the app. So check it out. I wanted to share that information really quickly, but I'm going to get to the main event. I am really thrilled to have Tyler and Andrea here tonight from Mindbridge. A colleague and I at Red Wine and Blue just finished the program with them, all about how our brain works with connections and conversations. And it was actually mind-blowing. It was so eye-opening as to why people sometimes fight back against facts and believe the disinformation. So I think you guys are in for a real treat, and you are going to really learn how to not only make better connections, but I think also reasons why maybe you shouldn't get as frustrated with people as you might sometimes do during those conversations. The presentation is going to take about an hour, and as you're going, please feel free to drop questions in the chat. I am going to pull questions. At the end, we're going to have a little after party to answer some of those questions. So if you want to stay for that after party and get questions answered, cool, please do. If you have to drop off, no problem, we understand. But that's kind of the plan for tonight. And so I'm going to start off by bringing up Tyler, and we will let her get going with the presentation.
Thank you, Julie. Welcome, everyone. It's so nice to be here with you this evening. We are so excited to share the world of Mindbridge with you all and really appreciate the opportunity to work with Red, Wine, and Blue in a new capacity after spending some time together this past summer. So I'm going to share my screen. And we'll get started. So we're really excited to be with you all today to talk about how to bridge divides and build connections. We're using the neuropsychology of implicit bias as the foundation and how this may impact your work, both with Red Wine and Blue and just on an everyday basis, and how we show up in the world. So before we get into content, I want to talk a little bit about who we are and why this might be a little different than some of the other trainings you may have had in the past. We have a saying here at Mindbridge that to change hearts and minds, you must first learn how to access them. And that's what we do. We use brain and behavioral science to empower human rights defenders, like you all. As a diverse group of activists, scientists, clinicians, storytellers, and actual real humans, we conduct programming, support partnerships, and direct research at the intersection of psychological science and human rights. And of course, for more about us, you can learn about us on our website. So what does this all mean? So we conduct original research and compile cutting-edge psychology and neuroscience, bridging science and human rights. And this is done through our Mindbridge Research and Evaluation Department. We also apply this research through strategic partnerships with local, national, and global organizations in order to build more effective and far-reaching interventions. Examples of this include our Healing Racial Trauma initiative under our Mental Health and Resiliency Department and our Countering Extremism Directive. And then lastly, we provide workshops and seminars like this. This is providing education on psychologically and neurobiologically informed approaches that will catalyze change. done through the Institute, which you all are a part of by being with us here today. And this summer, Mindbridge celebrated 9 years as an organization. We're gearing up for 10 years, which is quite a big deal for us. Having had the privilege of working with partners across 6 continents. And along the way, we've learned a great deal about social change and civic engagement, gathering the most effective methods and distilling cutting-edge insights from around the globe to apply to our communities here at home. And that little red dot is where our home base is, here in Maine. That's where I'm calling in from tonight. However, our team is spread across most of the US. So as we start our time today, no matter if we're in person or in a shared space online, we'd like to share some community commitments. And we'd like for you to join us in those. So with the buzz of life happening all around us, we ask that just for this hour, if it's possible, to stay present and be here with us now. We want to lead with empathy and compassion. We want to commit to communicating and look for opportunities for where we can push beyond our current knowledge and look for learning. And while we're doing more of a webinar style today, we encourage that frank and open dialogue with our community around these topics. And we'll stick around, like Julie mentioned, for some Q&A. So please pop your questions in the chat. And also from the Institute that's joining us here is Dr. Christine Brew, who is our scientific content expert, and she will happily be answering some of those questions along the way. So some of this information can be a little sticky. And so we ask that you listen with an open mind, and whenever it feels safe, to lean into just some of that discomfort. We want to respect confidentiality. We like to say that stories stay and lessons leave. This one's really important because something I always am trying to practice myself, that no idea is stupid, no question is stupid. The chances are, if you have a question, someone else here does too. So please ask it. And lastly, this is one of our favorites. We aren't going to figure out all of the ways to bridge divides in this hour, but we're really just going to scratch the surface to bring more awareness. So let's expect and accept non-closure. And know that if you want to go deeper, dig a little bit more into these conversations, you can visit us on our website to learn more about some other programming that you could participate in. So how many of you have entered into a conversation with someone who has different beliefs or perspectives than you, and it just didn't go as well as you had hoped? I know this happens to me on a daily basis, and I continue to leave wondering, how did that happen? And what could I do differently next time? So to figure this out, we believe you need to look under the hood at how our human brain actually processes information, makes decisions, and defends our identities and beliefs. So let's start with a bit of science. Let's begin with a term that we may have heard over and over again, seems to show up a lot when we're talking about bridging divides. It's implicit bias. So just take for a minute to think about this term. What does it mean? Where have you heard it before? Think as if you were going to come off mute and talk with us. What does that mean to you? I know it's a hot button topic. It's definitely a term that we talk about in a lot of different ways. The way that we define it is that implicit bias is the automatic or neurobiological process underlining unconscious stereotyping and prejudice guiding the perception and attitude towards social groups. We really want to kind of focus on those underlined elements of that definition. So the automatic, the unconscious stereotyping towards social groups. And here at Mindbridge, we'll get into in a minute about why this is happening, but we also want to say that if you have a brain, you have bias. We all have it. We all have a brain, we have bias. It's a fundamental system in our brains. And this bias influences everything we do, from how we show up in our conversations, to how we interpret messages, and to how we communicate our ideas. So by exploring this behavior through the lens of neuroscience and psychology, we begin to bring awareness that helps better understand both ourselves and those that we interact with. So through this type of understanding, we begin to take an unconscious process into our conscious awareness. And that way, when we're in conversation with someone who sees things differently, we can do something simple but powerful. We can notice our gut reactions, we can pause, and we can choose curiosity over judgment. This is how we meet people where they are, and how we believe that change can really begin. And so to better understand what actually takes place in our brain, these processes, I want for you to sit back for a moment and maybe close your eyes and imagining the following scene. You could tuck away your pen or your drink or whatever you have in front of you that might be distracting. And just for a moment, sit back and imagine. Imagine that you are standing at the edge of a vast river. The water is flowing swiftly. Its current is pushing relentlessly forward. You hear the rush of water, feel the cool mist on your skin, and catch the scent of the fresh earth and water in the air. Everything is moving around you, alive with energy, pulling and flowing in ways that you can't fully see and maybe not even understand. And then, in the middle of the river, you notice a small boat drifting. Inside the boat is a traveler, gripping an oar to steer the boat through the current. And I want you to take a moment here. You can open your eyes and ask yourself, who is in charge? Is it the traveler in the boat, adjusting the course with the pull of the oar using a tool of sorts? Or is it the river, powerful and relentless, deciding where the boat goes, no matter where or how hard it is rowed? So who's in control here? Traveler, river? Just take a moment. Think about your answer. And we've presented this in a million different ways. And we've heard a lot of different, or not different ways, but to a lot of different people. And we've heard a lot of different answers. And so some of you may have said the traveler because the person has oars navigating the river. Some of you may have said the river because it's a natural feature and ultimately that's in control. And some of you may have thought of something completely different. But the reality is there isn't really, this might have been a little bit of a trick question. This isn't necessarily right or wrong answer. It's an allegory that represents two dueling processes in our brain. So let's first look at the river. So the river represents our vast unconscious neurobiological processes, often dictating our feelings and reactions. It's fast, it's associative, and it's unconscious. And the traveler in the boat, on the other hand, represents our reasoned and our conscious processes. It's in charge of executive function, which often looks as if they have control with oars in hand. And so that's cool, but why do we have these processes in the first place? So what if I told you that 40 to 90% of everything we do, all of our behaviors, are unconscious? Now that's quite a range, and it of course depends on the study that they were looking at. But 40 to 90% is a lot. And even if we go to the low end of that spectrum, say 50%, that's half of everything that we do is unconscious. Think about all the things we don't think about, the ways we habitually cross our legs when we sit down, or how we pick up a fork and a knife, how I go to push up my glasses even when I have my contacts in, or maybe the ways in which we unconsciously automatically react when we see someone who may look different than ours. So if we stay in that range of 40 to 90%, we still have to wonder, why is that? Because the reality is at any given moment, our brains receive 11 million bits of information. We are listening, we're remembering, we're experiencing the temperature of the room, we're calculating our proximity to the table as we round the corner to shift our position. But the reality is that our brains can only process 40 of those bits. And recent research is starting to show that it's even less than that. So to manage what would otherwise be an overwhelming amount of information, our brains create a set or series of mental shortcuts known as implicit processes. So in 1999, psychologist Daniel Kahneman looked at the river and the traveler in a different way, a set of two systems. System one, our river, relies on intuition and instinct. It is unconscious, it's fast, it's associative, kind of runs on autopilot. Think of those times when you see something fly by your head and immediately you duck in panic. That's our system one. System two represents our rational thinking, our boat rower. It's slower, it's logical, and it takes more effort. That processing of the shadow, once we realize that maybe what we were ducking in panic from was actually just a bird's shadow, that's our system two. Some of you may also be caretakers of small humans. You may often act as their system two, helping them decide if it's a great idea to jump off that rock or to eat that sticky found object that they just found. So our system one, that occurs in our amygdala. And a lot of people have a different association with what the amygdala does. We often hear people say lizard brain or emotions, and that's right. Our amygdala is the part of the brain most commonly known for fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response, a realm of emotions related to fear. That's our system one. Our system two occurs in our prefrontal cortex. And this is where our executive functioning occurs. Things like time management, organization, planning, self-control, including emotional management. It processes the input from system one and helps to make sense of it. So what is happening when our brains see something, anything? We take in that information, our system one reacts first, and then our system two responds. So let's shift from what happens to why and do one more moment of visualization. So imagine you're on a hiking trail. It's a beautiful fall day. The sun is out, shining warmth on your skin. It's a late September in Maine. It's beautiful. The leaves are starting to fall. It smells crisp. You hear the sounds of the gentle rustling in the wind as the wind picks up. As you continue on, one foot in front of the other, all of a sudden you look down on the ground and all of a sudden there's this coiled thing in the middle of the trail. What is it? That's right, it's a snake. What do? You run, you jump back in fear. Most people say that some people like snakes. Most people will say, get out of there. So what just happened? The visual information, that coiled thing on the ground, first enters through our retinas and our eyes and then is sent to the thalamus, the brain's central relay station for sensory input. From there, it travels to the visual cortex, where your brain identifies and labels what you're seeing. And finally, this information is passed to the amygdala, where the emotional meaning is assigned. So after you see it and it's assigned a label, the first place it goes is the amygdala. So what is the amygdala there to do again? To identify whether that coiled thing on the ground is a threat. So the amygdala is most often associated with fear, but perhaps a better way of thinking about it is thinking about as a way of deciding what sort of emotion we should associate with a particular experience. So let's head back to the trail. You've just identified the coil thing. It's a snake. You immediately responded without thought. Why? For protection, to ensure that if it was a snake, that you had a plan. And this is an immediate reaction that is from our system one in action. And after a moment, you fully processed what you saw and you realize, oh wait, that was just a rope. Nothing to fear, but I already reacted with fright. And this is what happens a lot with these implicit processes within our brain. The reaction has already happened and you didn't even consciously recognize it. It was only sometimes later that your system two came online and said, oh yeah, I reacted too quickly. No threat here. And so the same thing happens when we see someone or something. That information travels through our visual processes, and if they are different than us, our brain, our amygdala, could potentially associate them as a threat. That's our system one. Only a few minutes later, does our system two catch up and say, hold on, that's just another human in front of me. They're not a threat, but it's too late sometimes because our brain has already reacted. So when we're working alongside people to bridge divides, the first step, this is our first step, to understand the way our brain reacts, and then that their brain is doing the same exact thing. This is a neurobiological system in our brain, and while we can't immediately control it, we can slow down, we can pause, and choose curiosity as our first defense to mitigating this bias. In order to do that, we have to better understand what we do with all of that information and how we relate to it. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Andrea. She's going to take us through the next bit.
Thanks, Tyler. Hi, everyone. All right, so in order to kind of understand this a little bit more, we're going to look to a study that illustrates the quick workings of our brain. So in 2012, Huth and colleagues wanted to know more about how the brain categorizes and organizes the information that it is responding to. And this is really to understand that overwhelming amount of data that our brain is taking in. Remember that 11 million bits of information. So to do so, they invited participants to view movies while in an fMRI. So just a quick note, an MRI, which many of us might be familiar, maybe you've had one before, taken someone to get one, is a neuroimaging technique that measures brain activity by detecting changes in the blood flow in your brain. So it's looking for these like oxygenated areas that is activated in response to some sort of stimuli. And when we are talking about scientific studies, it's fMRI. That F stands for functional, and that is really just an MRI used functionally in studies. So kind of the same thing that people are using medically. Okay, so back to the study. So people were put into an MRI and the movies were shown to them. And so those movies were the stimuli. And these movies contained over 1,700 objects. Far too many images for our brains, our system one, to consciously process at a time. And so what happened? So here's an image from the study. Take just a moment to look over it and just kind of notice what immediately becomes apparent to you. Even if you can't make out all those little words on the screen, what do you notice? For me, the first thing I see is groupings of color. And if we could zoom in, we can't quite, but if we could zoom in, we could see that these groupings are associated with words. And this image showed that the brain categorized these items. They put them into groups based on similarities. So seamlessly, effortlessly, the brain categorized over 1,700 objects into what Huth colleagues found to be nearly 30,000 categories. So this study, among others, just kind of really shows us that the human brain can recognize and categorize thousands of distinct objects in an instant. We're exceptionally good at this. We're really good categorizers. We see this represented visually here on the screen. Um, but just as easily as our brain kind of recognizes those objects in the movie and immediately categorizes them without thought, we also do the same with people. And so for our work here together, we want to look at how our brains quickly sorts and distinguishes between us and them. For there to be an us, there must be a them. And we're really, really good at this. Us, we're the people that help to keep you safe throughout our evolutionary history. And them, we're the people that maybe want to harm you or might try and kill you. And so I want to point out two very important things here. First, how you self-identify. Who is the us and who is the them is crucial into the way that this process works. And secondly, these functions as primary systems. This means that it comes on right away. It's one of the first thing that happens when you see somebody or something. And this process was so evolutionary advantageous that it became neurobiologically encoded, and not just encoded as one of the first and primary processes, sorry, not just encoded, but as one of the first and primary processes that take place when we see something or someone. And so this really just means that our brains are designed to keep us safe. To feel safe, it has to be able to recognize what we're looking at, name it, and determine whether or not that who standing in front of us is a threat in milliseconds. And so research tells us that it actually takes 50 milliseconds to register someone's gender when we first see them, and only twice that long to note their racial background. And for reference, it only takes us 150 milliseconds to blink. And so we register somebody's gender and racial background faster than we blink. So we can say and even believe we don't judge others based on their perceived gender or race or based on their visible identity. But the reality is we're totally unaware of these unconscious processes occurring, those 11 million bits of information into those little tiny bits we can process, and that this absolutely impacts the way that we respond to others. And because our brain creates these implicit processes and we're sorting people faster than we can blink, we can certainly say that our brain is hardwired to sort people instinctively into groups based on their similarities. And just to note, this categorization happens all around the world in every culture. It's been studied in a number of places and it happens over and over again. So as we seek to build stronger connections, we must be aware of this fact that our brains are instantly categorizing people into us and them based on perceived identities, and that our own personal identities influences how we respond to the person standing in front of us and how they respond to us. And so important to all of this is something called social identity theory. Social identity theory proposes that a person's beliefs and perceptions about oneself and about the world around them is derived from both personal and social identities, leading them to categorize themselves and others into groups, just as we saw, the us and the them. And so we could spend years talking about social identity, and not to put Christina on the spot, but she has spent years thinking and researching that. But so for today, we're going to get really into the short of it. And that is really just that social identity tells us that people form groups very, very easily. It really doesn't take much to get someone to identify it in a group. And once they do, their individual identity is tied to that group membership, and that group membership sometimes can take over. Within social identity, we also know that out-group members are seen as lesser than, and then winning occurs even at the cost to the group. It's more important for the group to win. It's more important to the group to be right than it is to maybe uphold some of the necessary aspects of the group. So this isn't about being good or bad. It's about being human. And understanding these patterns gives us a critical tool for crafting messages that speak to the identities and groupings of the people standing in front of us, and to make sure that people belong, allowing us to more deeply shape connections and build bridges. And so this first point here, that people form groups very easily, is actually the foundation of a concept called minimal group paradigm. And so minimal group paradigm helps us just to understand how easily these boundaries form and how quickly bias can emerge. This theory explores minimal conditions needed for people to start favoring their group and discriminating against others. And we see this, there's a lot of studies that kind of show that this group can form favoritism for the in-group forms and discrimination against the out-group forms. And so what we've learned from decades and decades of research is it really doesn't take much to form these groups. Even arbitrary distinctions, like wearing a different colored hat, for example, are enough to trigger in-group loyalty and out-group bias. And this isn't just light favoritism, like blaming a teacher for playing favorites. It's a deep psychological pull toward protecting our own in-group, even when the stakes are low and the differences are meaningless. And so the implication of all of this is really that our brains are wired for group-based thinking, and that wiring shapes how we see, interpret, and respond to others, even without us realizing it. So again, that's system one. It's happening quickly. And these group dynamics are deeply tied to motivational behavior and biases. So the ways that we behave, and those system one, that immediately implicit processes that are occurring. So earlier we talked at the very beginning, not too long ago, just half an hour ago, we talked about bias as a result of implicit processes that evolved as a means of protection. And these implicit processes are those things that create the us and the them inherent to social groupings. So that kind of us and them is required to create those group dynamics so that we can feel that group membership. And it's defined by social identity theory. And people are not just passively assigned to groups. They're motivated to behave in ways that affirm and reinforce their group identity. And so this can look like trying to elevate one's in-group status. And it can also look like confirmation bias, rejecting information that challenges group norms, even when no real competition exists. And this is because group membership fulfills two powerful psychological needs. So being a part of a group fills the need to belong, and it fills the need to matter. Two things inherent to really being a human. And so even trivial groups, right? We saw that wearing a hat, being told you're an overestimator or an underestimator if you look at dots on a paper. These little trivial groups can satisfy this need, because if you're in a group, you belong and you matter to those people in the group. And so once we feel a part of a group, we act in ways that protect it. Loyalty, conformity, even silence, because the group helps define who we are. And this is where confirmation bias enters the picture. And that is something I see all the time, confirmation bias. I think that word pops up. And so this confirmation bias, like we reviewed earlier, is really where our brains create these shortcuts. Because our brains create these shortcuts to handle overwhelming amounts of information, one of those shortcuts is to favor information that supports what we already believe, especially if it aligns with our group worldview. So if it confirms staying within our groups even stronger, we have a tendency to believe it even more. And so bias isn't just a mental error, it's motivated. It protects identity, it preserves belonging, and it reduces cognitive dissonance. And so, for a simple example that we might see a lot in political partisanship, people might reject facts not because they're uninformed, but because agreeing with the other side could feel like betraying their own in group, thus betraying their need to belong and their need to matter. And so we see this all day long these days. So groupthink and in-group bias reinforce each other. They make us feel safe, certain, morally right. They make us feel like we belong. They make us feel like we matter. And for many, those feelings are worth more than accuracy because that's how our brain works. And so while bias is a natural cognitive process, it's also deeply emotional and social. It's tied to identity, safety, and belonging. And that's why disrupting this isn't just about logic, education. It's not about facts. It's about creating space for a new way of seeing without threatening who someone is and what they believe in, because that is so crucial to how we show up in the world and how we associate to others. And so our behavior, our beliefs, including our bias, is motivated and informed by our groups. And this is because humans are known as something called motivated reasoners. We consider the outcomes of thinking and feeling in certain ways based on the goals we're trying to achieve. And this allows us to feel safe. So if our fast emotional brain is doing so much of the driving, that system one is kind of calling a lot of the shots before system two can come online. And if our reasoning often works in service to our in groups, then this helps explain why changing minds and shifting narratives is so complex and also presents an opportunity to bridge divides. So, as we've seen so far, bias really acts as a primer in nearly every situation. It shapes our perceptions, which are filtered through the lens of our identity. It influences interpretation of what's happening around us, and it enhances an emotional response. And one of the responses that we almost always see is defensiveness. And I know that I definitely get defensive. I want to say from time to time, but really quite often. And so I'm curious for a moment. I want you to really recall a moment. Maybe it's something that happened recently. Maybe it's just something that comes to mind. So recall a moment when you heard something that felt challenging or something that tested you or activated something really important with you. Maybe it pushed against something you believe. And as you revisit that moment, notice where that reaction shows up in your body. What were you feeling in that moment? So in these moments, when something stirs an emotion, there's often a little flicker of defensiveness underneath it. And I know we as humans, we kind of see this all the time. And so this is where something that we call our guardians comes into play. We use this term guardians to describe the brain's built-in defense mechanisms, the ones that step in to protect your beliefs, your identity, your worldview from being challenged too quickly or too deeply. Because really, up until the point that we're standing in right now, those identities, beliefs, those worldviews, they've kept you safe. They've kept you alive. So why would we want to challenge them? And so these guardians aren't bad, right? They exist for that reason. They help us to survive, and they've helped us to survive up until this point. And so they defend us when we feel maybe under attack emotionally. And that helps us to also maintain our group memberships. So, from an evolutionary perspective and a psychological perspective, the systems we've built, our beliefs, our values, our morals, the things that motivate us, have kept us safe, socially connected, and able to make meaning in the world. So when something new comes in and challenges that, it might disrupt that system, and the brain sees it as a potential threat. And that's where that amygdala starts flaring, right? We have that response again, that snake response. Ah, what is this? And it doesn't really evaluate that new information rationally. So it sends in our guardians or our defense mechanisms right away. And so these guardians are not merely opinions or biases. They're evolutionary developed neurobiological processes that function to maintain psychological safety and ensure a psychological stability and ensure a sense of safety. They're fast emotional responses. They're a part of system one thinking, as we've been talking about. And most of the time, we're not really reacting to the content of the message. We're reacting to the feeling of the threat that it triggers within us. And that's why understanding these guardians matters. not just our own, but the ones that show up in our audiences, our communities, ourselves, the people standing there in front of us that we're trying to build connections with and bridge divides. And so if we want to build these connections and bridge these divides and create these messages that reach people, it's really helpful to recognize what might be activating your own guardians and the guardians of the people in front of you and find ways to speak through that defense and not against it. And so because these guardians show up in these moments of defensiveness, um, they're not really doing anything wrong. They're doing what our brain is designed to do. It's designed to protect us. And so these responses kicked in when we're faced with something that feels threatening, even if we don't consciously know that that's what it is, right? Like sometimes I get defensive, with my family, and I don't realize that it's because I feel that my identity or my beliefs or something has threatened me. And so that's key. We're talking about a perceived threat, not actual harm. So sometimes it's the fear of losing social standing or significance. Sometimes it's the fear of isolation or being pushed out of your in-group or losing that support of the people around you. Sometimes it's old pain or trauma becoming activated. And whatever the source, the job of the guardian is the same. Keep us safe, protect us. And often that means we put up a wall. Emotionally, cognitively, socially, we do what we must in order to protect us so we don't have to take in something that could destabilize our sense of self or our in-group belonging. And understanding this lets us have a little bit more compassion in those moments for ourselves and for others when that resistance shows up. But these guardians, these defense mechanisms that we all have, are made up of beliefs, emotions, and habits that really allow us to avoid discomfort, especially feelings like shame or sadness or fear. And they often show up when we feel criticized, when we feel misunderstood, when we feel exposed. And while they're trying to protect us, they can really get in the way of connection and growth. And unchecked, guardians turn into behaviors like what you're seeing on the screen. We might stop listening, try and make excuses for our behavior, justify, blame others, find someone to blame, make accusations, justify our actions, avoid or bring up the past, minimize or dismiss other feelings and experiences. And I know I am one who has engaged in all of those behaviors when my defenses are brought up. But here's the key: the guardians aren't the enemy here. They're really there to try and help. And our role isn't to push them away or minimize them. It's really to listen and ask what they might need. And when that happens, we can kind of reframe the purpose of those behaviors when they come out in us. And so it might need validation. It might need to be met with non-judgment, with curiosity, or a willingness to share vulnerably. And so we have these guardians and defense mechanisms that come up in conversations, especially when we're meeting people who maybe have different thoughts or beliefs than us. And they're acting to protect us, as we said. And because we hold multiple identities and beliefs and values, we're simultaneously trying to protect all of this. So a lot of times when we're talking, we have a tendency to kind of think, system one, system two, but there's more things happening in your brain. I'm defending this identity, but actually I'm a multifaceted human made up of all of these different identities and beliefs, and I'm just trying to protect my whole self at all times. So while we're going to introduce a few guardians here, really we can think of them more as kind of common archetypes that might represent something being protected. And by doing this, we can really think about, all right, if I think about this protection mechanism as this guardian of what I'm trying to protect, and what's being activated, what can I do to kind of let it lower its sword a little bit? So the first guardian we have that we often see when bridging divides is the guardian of the status quo. And this one might flare up when social change is occurring around us. And maybe that social change isn't totally aligned to our beliefs and identities, or maybe change is just really scary for us. It doesn't sit well in that moment. And so this guardian acts to minimize urgency and protect our comfort and our stability and to avoid discomfort. So in doing so, it might protect social standing or a sense of control by sticking to what's familiar and reasonable while stalling systemic change. You might hear something like, that's just not how we've done it before, or we don't do things like that here, protecting what the status quo is. Another one we see that really ties into confirmation bias that we talk to is one and none. I don't know how many of you have experienced this, but you're talking to someone and maybe you're presented with some new information and the person in front of you is like, no, I know this one example that nullifies everything you're saying. Maybe it's a anecdote that someone told you. And so this is that tendency to focus on one example that contradicts the information, the new information in front of you, to maybe protect that change or to protect your in-group. And so here we might hear, but yeah, but what about, or, well, I know this one person who XYZ happened to, and those details that kind of contradict the information being presented. Another one that may be more familiar to a lot of us here, and that certainly pops up for me, and I will say Tyler as well, we talk about this one a lot, is the too busy. And this is when we continually excuse ourselves from kind of doing hard work, mitigating bias, engaging in advocacy work, etc., because life is just too busy. It's not that we don't want to do it, it's just that there's a lot weighing us down. And so here we might hear something like, I wish I could, but I've got too much going on. And just a side note, that is a legitimate statement to make. Sometimes we are just too busy, and taking care of ourselves first in these moments is how we can slow down and what is critically important so that we can actually do that work. We can do the work of mitigating bias and engaging in advocacy work and bridging divides because we're taking care of ourselves first. So sometimes the too busy one's okay, but it's just one to recognize if it pops up a lot. Is it defending something or is it actually allowing you to like take the space you need? And so something important to note here is that we all have guardians, just like we all have biases, just like we all have the system one and system two in our brain. And so it's like that phrase from the start. If we have a brain, we have bias. If we have a brain, we have guardians. We have defense mechanisms that are protecting us. I know mine are super active. I'm constantly trying to meet them with curiosity and working to regulate my very active defense mechanisms, and it's hard. And so when we are showing up to conversations and seeking to bridge divides, this awareness of our own defense mechanisms is important because we can meet ourselves with that curiosity and find a little validation. And we also have to be extremely aware that the person in front of us is likely potentially having a defense flare up as well. Sometimes those defensiveness just go head to head, and that's where it ends. But as we bridge divide through messaging, we can show up in conversations in our communities so that we can kind of calm some of that. So we've got a lot to hold on to here. So to recap, we've learned that people don't just hear messages, they filter them through their identity. Social identity theory explains that we define ourselves by our group memberships, political, racial, religious, professional, regional, etc. And when a message is perceived as challenging to someone's group, it's often rejected not because of the content, but because it feels like a threat to who they are. We also saw that the brain forms an us and a them category instantly, even when the groups are meaningless. This minimal group paradigm shows that people quickly form loyalty to in-groups and the suspicion towards out-groups, even when those groups are randomly assigned. And so advocacy, these divisions are often much deeper. And so if your message is perceived as coming from an othered group, it may be rejected before it's even processed, regardless of how rational or how moral it is. And so who speaks matters as much as what it's said. Group identity shapes who we trust, not just what we believe. And people are more likely to trust messages from someone they see as part of their in-group, someone who gets them. The same fact delivered by a peer or a pastor might be trusted, but dismissed if it comes from an outsider or an expert. And that's why on the ground work, probably a lot of the work that you all do, a lot of the work that Red, Wine, and Blue is doing is so crucial to effective advocacy work because connections and conversations with the people from inside one's own community are really the key here. Messages that threaten group belongings backfire, even if they're right. And that's because people are motivated to protect their in-group. If a message implies your group is wrong or people like you are bad, it can provoke defensiveness and shut down conversations almost immediately. even if the message is factually accurate or morally sound. That emotion kind of matters more in that moment. And lastly, we've seen that our guardians are there to protect us. And when these guardians are activated, a wall is immediately built. It's challenging, but possible to activate what they actually need in that moment rather than what they're actually trying to protect. And so when we don't arrive with curiosity or the capacity to see beyond our defensiveness, messages that feel like attacks on our identity, our values, our belief systems, our group often backfire. And so what do we do about this? All this information that we've given you, what can we do? So in our efforts to bridge divides and build meaningful connections, we aim to approach each person with curiosity and openness, something that I'm sure most everyone here is doing. We're seeking to understand the elements of the people's identities who stand in front of us so that our connection can be inclusive and affirming to who they are. So we strive to align our messages with the audience's values and identities. So the audience can, right, just be the person sitting at the table with you. When we can seek those shared values as a foundation for genuine connection, we usually can meet people where they are without attacking the identity and without really flaring up any of that defensiveness. We want to invite people to see themselves inside the stories of change, not on the outside of it. And we want to build connections within our communities using trusted messengers with in-group credibility. So that's you all in your communities. We want our language to be inclusive of that person's identity standing in front of us and avoid language that signals you're not one of us and immediately raises our guardians. And lastly, while changing our deeply held defense mechanisms is challenging, not likely we can do through a conversation because been built throughout our whole lives to protect us. We can craft messages that strategically work around those guardians, better meeting their needs rather than the defense. And so knowing, right, like knowing maybe some of those guardians of the people that sit in front of you, you could think, all right, if I say this might flare their guardian. So what can I do to kind of work around it and still get my message across? And so all of this combined with the awareness of our unconscious processes allows us to pause, choose curiosity over judgment, and meet people where they're at to build stronger connections and bridge divides. And so in our final moments today, we're going to give you one more practical tool. That last slide kind of had our little tidbits, right? But a practical tool that we often use at Mindbridge and one that we can use when we're in a tense conversation and the stakes feel high. And maybe it's one where our perspectives differ or we're just not sure where to go from. And so we call this the HERE technique, and it's designed to help you stay grounded while keeping the conversation open, respectful, and collaborative. And so we're going to walk through each part. So we've got H for hedge your claims. And this isn't about being unsure, it's about softening the certainty in our language so it doesn't shut the other person down. Phrases like, I think it's possible that, or I wonder if, can invite dialogue instead of sparking defensiveness. E is emphasize agreement. Look for the places where your values or goals overlap. I think we both want, or we're both concerned about, can signal shared ground, which helps to shift the dynamic from me versus you, or us versus them, to we're in this together. Even if you don't agree with everything you're saying, right? Can you look for one little area that we can find? I think we're both trying to protect our families in the same way, or not in the same way. We both really care about protecting our children. So something like that. We've got A, acknowledge other perspectives. Even if you disagree, show you're listening, right? We can disagree with someone all day, but if we can say, I see your point. I think what you're saying is, and just repeat back what they're saying, validate them, allow them to know that you're listening and acknowledging them. This builds trust and demonstrates respect. And R is reframe to the positive. This one's about offering a hopeful direction forward. Something like, I really appreciate it when, or it would be so wonderful if, to keep the conversation constructive. So we've got hedge, emphasize, acknowledge, reframe. And this doesn't mean you're agreeing with everything someone saying, or you're giving up your values. It means you're choosing a way of communicating that leaves space for both of you to stay in that conversation, find those little moments of connection so that we can bridge divides and create stronger connections and communities.
And so I'm going to jump back in with one last little reflection for you all. We always like to leave everyone with something to stick in their pocket to think about, something to chew on. And our question to you all is, how might what you've learned here today, something new, some new language, new understanding of something that you already are doing on your everyday basis, how can you take that to shift how you show up in your communities and strengthen your role as a more connected and powerful movement? You all have showed up today. You are part of Red, White, and Blue. You're already engaging in your communities, and hopefully something that we shared with you all today is something that you can tuck in your pocket to take along with that engagement. So with that, we want to say thank you. We are so grateful to be a part of this community and to join you all this evening. We want to say thank you to Julie to make this all happen and for connecting us all to you. We are going to hang on a little bit longer for some Q&A if anybody else would like to do that with us. You can find more information about us on our website. And then we also just want to put a small little plug about our public course that is an expanded series on understanding populism and extremism. It is on the 30th of October. Whether you're a curious citizen, an educator, an organizer, or just wondering why things feel so fractured online, this is a space to learn, reflect, and reconnect the dots. So with that, I'd like to say thank you. I'm going to stop my share. And that is our presentation for the evening.
The first question, I think I'm just going to jump right into this because I would love the tools that you just gave us. I would love to like do a walkthrough example of this. So I think it gives people, a good like how to apply this. So let's say I am sitting at a family event and I meet somebody and it's very clear that we have different political views. So maybe we're talking about reproductive freedom or just public education. Let's go with public education. Um, what would be your first step or what would you do to like, once you realize, okay, we're not going to agree on this, like, how would you start trying to build that bridge, make that connection? I would just love kind of thoughts as like as a real life example.
Well, I'll let Christine join us with some ideas too. But really, I think some of the things that Andrea mentioned in the HERE approach is really, we want to be able to listen, right? We have to be able to use skills in listening to be able to first hear what people are saying, right? We want to be able to hear our defensiveness that it might be picking up, but we want to be able to listen and we have to be able to regulate ourselves. And in order for us to listen, that regulation is important. But we have to be able to actually hear what values might be coming up, what morals might be coming up, what parts of their identity might be coming up. I'm seeing people put things in the chat about reframing some of the information that you might be hearing to clarify, am I hearing you correctly? One thing that's really important too is that validating someone does not mean that you agree with them. It just means that you heard them. And so that's a really important thing too. And so Christine or Andrea, I'd love to hear anything else that you might want to, we've all had these conversations, so it's not rare for us.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in. I'm seeing a lot of people in the chat bringing up how to do this when the other person isn't maybe as receptive as we would hope that they're being. And so I think that comes to a different part of the HERE model, which is making sure that you are in a context that supports having that difficult conversation. So if you're coming in with having had a hard day, you were in a traffic jam on the way home, that can activate you, right? And that might mean that you're not as receptive. You don't know what kind of day they've had. Maybe they're not as receptive. So doing some pre-work of like setting the stage and making sure that it is a context where you can actually engage in active listening, calm yourself down if you need to, and move forward productively. And having that on both sides is the ideal scenario. Not always possible, but if it's someone that you want to stay in relationship with, give them that opportunity to come into the conversation as their best selves.
Yeah, totally. And I think my favorite part of HERE that I'll just add on to is the emphasize agreement part, because I am somebody who does not easily agree with people I don't agree with. Like it's my natural stance to say no. Like that is, how could you think that? And so the thing that I practice most is that emphasize agreement. Sometimes I have to remind myself I'm listening for somewhere that their identity is coming through and I can agree with that part of their identity. So, I hear that you are really conscious of health. Me too. And then move from there. Like I try and find one little nugget that we can agree on, and then I feel a little bit more regulated from that. They might too, and then we can try and move forward. And I think, as Christine was saying, and some of you in the chat, like sometimes it's just not working, and sometimes it's not like emotionally safe in that moment to continue, and that's an important thing to recognize as well.
I love what you all were saying because it actually backs up some of the training we do about finding common ground. And you just have to find that one little thing. I'm also curious, and this is separate from what was in the chat, but we talk a lot, you guys talk so much about in-group and out-group and just how easily we can fall into those. Is finding those common values or starting a conversation with like the connection you all have, like we both live in the same city, we both have kids in the same school, like does that help with like the in-group, out-group, or is that more clearly like defined in the brain and you see through that?
That is a great question, Julie. I'm going to start talking again about our minimal group paradigm that we introduced earlier in this lecture. So if you don't remember, or if you were late joining, the minimal group paradigm shows just how easily we can form connections with other people and form our social groups. So yeah, if you are able to make that connection, you have started that process of putting yourselves in the same social category. I've been seeing some questions and some responses in the chat saying, yeah, some of those are stronger than others. So you might have certain identity affiliations that are much stronger than just living in the same area or neighborhood with some, but you don't know what's going to resonate with a person. And so it's a great way to start building up that shared context and that shared experience. And I'll let Tyler and Andrea jump in as well.
I don't have anything to add. That was beautiful.
Okay, I just saw this question in the chat and I love it. And I want to bring it up to you all. The question is about the hedging part of here. And they said that so often women are dismissed when you're not confident, where men can kind of get away with, hedging their bets and they still sound like they know what they're talking about. Just kind of like, is there a way to help avoid playing? The question was, how do we avoid playing into that diminishing bias or the bias that's just an inherent in that type of relationship? That's a tough one. Just gonna acknowledge it's a tough one. Mm.
I can take a stab at it. So I would actually reframe that and think, why do we think that's diminishing? I think that's kind of a superpower that we can have as women, as people who are socialized to be empathetic and to listen and to form those connections. So lean into that. That's a strength that we all carry. And if we've been socialized in that way, or it's something that we can practice and a skill that we can employ in how we relate to one another.
Okay, that's kind of a mic drop answer, so we're gonna just stick with that one. I really like that. Another question I thought was interesting is, since messages that imply, something in your in-group is wrong or something you believe is wrong, how does your mind work with that? Like when you're talking to someone who's an expert, like you go to the doctor and they're telling you something that doesn't align with what your in-group believes or something of that nature. Is there a difference in how your mind processes that when they recognize the person's an expert?
Yes, we have a huge bias towards authority figures. However, drawing from some of our other sessions, authority is something that is set up in our social structures. So who you view as an authority figure might not be viewed by someone else as an authority figure. But yes, when we are presented with someone who we recognize as an authority figure, they have a lot more influence and power over us and shaping how we think and how we respond. Maybe the PhD next to my name is doing that for you. I hope it's not. I want to be in conversation with you all and not talking down to you all. I think it's really important that we have conversations on a level that everyone can understand and engage with.
Another question was about just social media algorithms. So obviously, how does that impact our brain function because it's reinforcing, everything we believe and then constantly reinforcing it and stronger every single day. Just curious how you feel about the algorithms and how that's impacting the way we think.
Well, this is a beautiful opportunity for us to plug our next public course because it is something that Christine is actively developing in October to specifically talk about algorithms. And Christine, I don't know if you want to add a little bit of context to that.
Yeah, we're gearing up to talk about that for a solid hour. I would love to have more people join us and to answer even more of your questions on that. Because it's not just how our brains work, it's how our social categorization works as well. So we're going to go back and dip a little bit more into social identity theory and talk about how that plays out in online spaces. But yes, there are numerous and varied ways that algorithms are playing a part in how we interact with each other and how we think about ourselves.
Someone asked if your system one is constantly in action.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So that, and we might have lost Christine for a moment, but that our system one, so that 11 million bits of information that we were talking about in the slides is, yes, it's about turning the corner, turning your corner so you don't bump into it. It's experiencing the temperature of the room, but it's also about your breathing, like the mechanisms in your body that are happening, your temperature regulation, things that you can't control. And so our system one is not only reacting to everything around us, but it's active because we're always taking in bits of information. Christine, hi. Christine can probably add more to that.
That was perfect. I just had to adjust my lighting. It was getting too dark in my room.
Someone asked about the role of AI in interactions and influence on different pathways. I don't know if that's part of your presentation, your next presentation at all, but does that play a role in any of this?
Yeah, it depends by what you mean by AI. So AI is kind of underlying a lot of what we're dealing with in online spaces right now. So we'll go into that a bit in our upcoming presentation.
The other thing that was interesting is how our brain processes the dangers and fear. And someone was like, I live in a rural area, there's tons of snakes in the woods. I have to teach my kid they're bad. Um, how does your brain, is it things you're taught? Like, how does your brain identify like danger or fear? I mean, some of it might be inherent, but a lot of it has to be taught, correct?
You all want me to start again on this? So some of it is evolutionarily based. So there were things that throughout all of human history have been a danger to us. The snake is one of those. So that's why most people have a fear reaction to snakes. I saw someone in the chat saying that they study it and they like want to see more and are they're really curious about it. So that's kind of overcoming that innate of evolutionary perspective on what is dangerous. But there are certain patterns, certain things in nature that are biologically encoded and represent things that are dangerous to us. So some of it is grounded in that and based in that, but a lot of the social categorization is learned and is about where we grew up and how we grew up and how we saw our parents, our family members, people around us responding and interacting in social situations. So like everything in psychology, it's always a great mixture of neuroscience, neurobiology, and psychology and socialization. And it just depends on what you're looking at and how you're responding.
I think the last question that I saw was a long time ago when you guys were first presenting was asking about do you ever use info from the book The Righteous Mind, Jonathan Haidt? I don't know who that is, so maybe you can expound on that a little bit.
Absolutely. We're familiar with his work and familiar with some of his more recent work. And we used to quote some of his stuff and have shifted some of our content just to be a bit more relevant to the world that we work in within human rights. So yes, we are familiar. And I think most recently, his book on the anxious generation was a big kind of resurface of a lot of his work as well.
Okay. Well, I think we've hit most of the questions from the chat, and I appreciate everyone dropping those. Dale, if you don't mind dropping right now our National Events Resources page. So if for those of you who are interested in the slides that you saw tonight, because there was a lot of information that obviously you need to kind of take your time to go through again, the slides are there along with a link to the event that they're talking about that they're going to be doing soon. So check that out. and also the bios of our wonderful speakers. So you can go to our National Events Resources page. I want to say thank you so much to Tyler and Andrea and Christine for joining us tonight, presenting this amazing information. Like I said, it was so eye-opening for me when I took your program and just really understanding that some of the frustrations we have with talking to people where we just don't hear facts is really just our brain protecting ourselves. And I think that gives you some grace in having those conversations and really trying to find ways to reach people, especially the people you care about in your life and you want to have, strong relationships with. So thank you so much. Any final thoughts, words you want to say before I sign off here?
No, just gratitude. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Okay. Well, everybody have a great night and hopefully we'll see you soon at another event. Good night, all.
Sounds good.